Hello and welcome to the All Saints Basement Sessions. My name's Christopher Tubbs, and today we have a very special guest with us, a Dutchman living in Washington, D.C. He's one of the sentinels of bass music culture and has come to prominence since his 2009 Great Lengths debut LP. And he's right here with me today in the basement here at All Saints at Spitalfields. It is, of course, Martyn.
Thank you very much for having me.
How are you?
Sentinels sounds good. I like it.
So now I know that you have a very wide scope of influences that make up your kind of musical love and inspiration. Everything from free jazz to post-punk to, of course, drum and bass. Mm-hmm. Now, where did it all start? When did music start playing a formative part of your life?
I can't even remember when it really started for me. I mean, I grew up in a family that had quite a lot of people that were either interested in music or playing music. A couple of my uncles were jazz drummers, and so music was always sort of, around the house as well. And my dad was a vinyl collector. He was a football player first and foremost, but in his sort of travels, back then there was no internet ordering or anything like that. So, and also, a lot of different countries had different styles of music and specializing in different styles. So what he would do is when he was traveling, he would just, visit record stores and just buy lots of records. And so he built up this huge vinyl collection, which is still in existence, but it's now owned by me. So he used to collect vinyl, and he'd be in all sorts of different styles of music as well. A lot of soul and a lot of sort of pop music from like late 70s, early 80s. A lot of folk music. He used to travel to Ireland a lot, so he would buy folk records there. And so when I was really young, he'd play music at the house all the time. So, and always vinyl. So it was good. My dad was always sort of free in what he liked, and he was very open to new stuff as well. And so I think that's what I got from my sort of heritage or my family, and it's good.
I've heard you talk about your very early clubbing experiences being in Eindhoven, in the south of Holland, where you studied. I mean, you were quite young when you went there, and quite young when you first experienced the nightlife?
I just started to explore music. And you know how you sort of go from scene to scene, I don't know if you ever had any, you had phases probably. Well, I have had many phases, and I enjoyed every single one of them because, it's sort of like a bit of a search, you find a couple of bands that you like, then you start digging a little bit deeper, and then before you know it, after a year or so of really getting into this one thing, you'd find a band that sort of, I don't know, like kind of juxtaposes the sound or whatever, and then you sort of roll into the next thing, And I remember, listening to lots of 80s hip-hop, and then all of a sudden, I was listening to more instrumental stuff like Meat Beat Manifesto and things like that. Going into a sort of industrial phase, I guess, and Front 2 for 2 and stuff like that. And then I think around that time, I started going to clubs and hearing the sort of, I would say, black version of Front 2 for 2, which was techno. And I think, from there you just sort of roll into clubbing and techno, and, I enjoyed dancing. And yeah, it was very early age when I started going to these clubs. But, I went to concerts as well when I was like 12 or 13. I had to go with like a chaperone, or what's it called? Someone that would...
Yeah.
Because I was so young, they wouldn't let me into the club otherwise.
A guardian.
Yeah. So my uncle, who was also a really cool guy, who used to go to bands and stuff a lot. So we would go to punk rock concerts together, and it was
amazing.
Cool. Yeah.
Most kids don't have that.
I know. I think it started when I was 13 or something, and I went to see hardcore bands, and I've seen lots of bands.
So you were saying that you were into 80s hip hop.
Yeah.
That was still when it was quite skeletal, quite drum machine based before it was really sample based, right?
It's kind of the transition, I think, because the first stuff I got into was like PE, yeah, mostly that sort of thing, and that's all. That is really where sampling started, with the Bomb Squad and first Public Enemy albums. So
Is that whole kind of Hank Shockley, cut and paste aesthetic? Was that an early influence for you?
yeah, for sure. Because we had a little hip hop band ourselves, and I used to have an Amiga computer, so I would program beats. And then a friend of mine has a Akai S900, which was like a very early sampler. And so he would make loops, and then I would just sort of, sync the beats to the loops, and then that's how we produced music. And then we had 2 rappers and 2 dancers, because back then you'd have dancers on stage, just doing all this simultaneous stuff.
So at what point was this? How old were you when this was going on?
I don't know, 13? Something like that, very early.
Really did start early.
Yeah.
And so at what point did you kind of, I don't know if graduate's the right word, but get involved in clubbing, and how old were you at that stage?
About 16, maybe. Yeah, so, but the weird thing was that, this hip-hop thing was sort of temporary and never really took it very serious. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be a musician later on or anything like that, I just thought it was sort of fun to do, and, I had a good time doing it, but I never really thought about a career at all, I didn't even think I was very talented in anything. So I was like, I just left it basically, and went back to my sort of vinyl collecting and running around listening to different styles of music, and rolled into clubbing. And even when I started clubbing, I had no intention of ever playing like an active part in it. I just liked going to clubs and dancing, and that's what I did. And it was only after a few years of sort of, going to house and techno clubs that I encountered drum and bass. And the thing was, with me was those techno things. I mean, I was so young. I just didn't feel that I was a real part of it. I was a consumer. And, the guys that were DJing or whatever, they were way older than me. They weren't really way older, but I thought they were, So I was always like, well, that's not really my generation. And then drum and bass came along, and I went to drum and bass nights, and those guys were my age. And all of a sudden, something clicked, and I was like, I can be an active player in drum and bass and do something, And we started going on sort of like pilgrimages to London, and we would go to the Blue Note where metalheads used to have a night. So we would, buy records all weekend and then end off with a Sunday night at Blue Note. And I got so inspired. For me, that was like a real different type of music and a different vibe. And I also loved the fact that London had such a sort of mixed crowd, especially at Blue Note. There was like lots of older people, there was very young people, all races, all. So it was really sort of a nice mix of people, and very friendly, and sort of all there for the same thing,
It wasn't quite as genrefied then, was it?
No. I mean, this was a sort
new
of
and exciting.
Yeah, this was like 95, 96 when it was sort of adventurous, and every week there would be new developments in the music, and there'd be like 60-year-old jazz drummers hanging out at the Blue Note to listen to the beats and and get inspired.
Amazing.
And Goldie was running around, and Björk was there, and it was like a really sort of fresh, new thing. And of course, as well, the sound system in that club was provided by Eskimo Noise, which was like a sort of legendary sound system crew.
Right.
And that was another thing, I never really paid attention to sound systems before, because I would just listen to the music, whatever sound system there was. But just seeing the sort of science of sound, that sort of grabbed me as well. So we went to this club, and when we would come back to little old Eindhoven, we were like, we want that here. So that's how we started organizing our own events. We wanted to be like metalheads. And of course, in the beginning, it looked nothing like metalheads, because there was like 3 people interested in what we did, and so it was super small. And I never even thought about DJing, but since there was no one else that would play the music.
So you were the club resident, you were the night resident.
Yeah, because there was no one else, and I did it together with a friend of mine, and none of us had enough records to play the entire night, so we would just sort of switch, and that's how I learned how to DJ, just live. I only had one turntable at home, So the only time I would actually encounter two and a mixer was live at the club.
I had a very similar experience, and there were some terrible train wrecks
Yes.
broadcast to too many people.
Yeah. I mean, I was glad that there wasn't that many people interested in our stuff in the beginning, but yeah, it was pretty bad. But it was cool. You know, we would just do our thing, and you know, we came up with like different concepts for the nights. We would give it a name. We would, you know, have a flyer, do decoration. You know, the guy I did it with, he was in art academy. So he was always like very creative with stuff and concepts, and you know, so we would just both sort of like smoke weed and think about all this, you know, futuristic stuff and try and sort of put that in a night. And I don't know if it ever came across, but for us, that was sort of what we did, you know.
Has that always been something for you? The idea of kind of sound and visual. Have you always?
Yeah, well, I think. You know, like I said, I never really considered myself that creative, you know, and the other guy was much more about sort of the concept, and I was more like a worker, you know. I was the one that sort of made it happen, went to the club and go to the club owner and sort of bullshit our way into there and, you know, organize stuff. I was the one running around for, you know, flyering, or I was the worker. And he was more of like the mental person, the smart one, you know.
Right.
So that's how it started, and we became a team. And, you know, one of the concepts that we came up with was called Red Zone. And that kind of stuck. We liked the name, and you know, we had a logo for it and stuff. So then our nights sort of, you know, we moved to a different venue, slightly bigger, and, you know, things started rolling. And we had a night called Red Zone. And so that's what we did. You know, we had this night, and eventually it ran for about 11 years, I think. And it grew into a monthly event for 1,300, 1,400 people. So it became a real big sort of drum and bass club event.
You made it.
I made it, yeah.
So now, listen, let's just backtrack for a second.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
And go back to maybe listen to a record that was an earlier influence when you first started buying records, perhaps.
Yes.
And would you like to just introduce what you're about to play for us?
Yeah. I'll play a track by the Talking Heads. The thing was that Talking Heads is sort of like a thread throughout my life in a way. My dad was a big Talking Heads fan, and you know, I grew up just listening to the music. And you know, the weird thing about Talking Heads for me always was that it was kind of ugly sounding. I thought when I was young, you know, because I was used to sort of top 40 pop music, and I think Talking Heads always slightly off, you know, like David Byrne is a bit off, and you know, there's lots of sort of weird chords, and it, you know, now I can sort of analyze it, but back then I just heard like weird stuff. Yeah. And so, but it always had sort of a strange attraction. And I think when they did Stop Making Sense, that was maybe 1984 or something like that. I was only 10. Yeah. I was only 10 years old, but you know, my dad bought the record, and all of a sudden it clicked because it was more poppy, and I really loved. Did you ever see the movie? Talking Heads movie?
Not for a long time, though.
Yeah. And it had like, you know, David Byrne in a sort of oversized suit. And I was really sort of intrigued by this suit. And also, I remember going to the barbershop with this booklet and saying, like, I want my hair like this guy. And so, you know, David Byrne was always like sort of a major inspiration. And then I forgot about them for about 10 years. And then, you know how it goes when, you know, all of a sudden the music that your parents listen to sort of, you know, come back at you, and then you start loving it again and all that. So, so then I started collecting all the old Talking Heads albums, and I became like a real freak with, you know, buying all the bootlegs and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, I'm not going as far as like concert posters and stuff like that, because, I mean, I would if I could, but, you know, I don't think my wife would allow me to go that sort of, you know, paste concert posters all over the house, you know. It's not really my...
Enough.
Yeah, exactly. But, I mean, but she does enjoy it. You know, we watched the movie together, and she really... I think she liked it. And now she recognizes the music because I play it so much. Anyway, the best album to me is Fear of Music. And that was a little bit older than Stop Making Sense. And this was one of those albums that really sort of... I don't know, it's just something slightly off about it. Mm-hmm. but very intriguing, and it's just stuck with me ever since. So let's
Let's hit it.
Yeah, this is a track called Mind.
Yeah, excellent. Less than obvious selection there, Martyn.
Yes, thank you. I love it. Yeah, just this whole album. It's just so good from beginning to end, and also lyrically. I mean, that was something that I obviously didn't pay very much attention to when I was little, but now it's some of the stuff is pure sort of poetry in a way. It's so weird, but also now I can sort of follow his thinking. Maybe that's because I've listened to it so much, but it's I like it.
You were saying before, that you went out and you were like, I want this haircut. You loved the way you dress and stuff like that. Was kind of the fashion element, the look of it, was that a big part of following genres for you?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's all about aesthetics in a way, and even in other music, I was always sort of fascinated by visual presentation of it, and clothing, hair, just style in general, I guess, and I mean, yeah. And I liked clothing and I liked looking good or whatever. It was, that was also important. And, even especially like in the early 80s, there was lots of goodies, there's lots of good stuff around, that was also sort of interesting visually, just, like 80s bands or even stuff like Duran Duran or Kacha Gugu or, that was like that's what I grew up with that sort of stuff. So
do you think that's been lost a bit?
No, I think it's back. So I think actually maybe the 90s were quite bland in a way. But
outside of grunge, perhaps.
But that never really appealed to me all that. I mean, I liked Soundgarden. That was basically the only band I really thought was interesting. But apart from not the fashion part, I wasn't really into that sort. But I think 2000s are back with a vengeance. Style-wise.
So before the drum and bass, when you were having those seminal clubbing experiences and you were experiencing house and Detroit techno for the first time, I've heard you talk about the idea that Rotterdam and Eindhoven have similarities in some ways to the spirit of Detroit. The idea of them somehow being hollow, abandoned cities. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, now I've been to Detroit, and there's nothing really like Detroit because, I think what I was sort of trying to say is that, both or all the three cities that you mentioned have sort of a very industrial background, and like Eindhoven as well is where Philips, that electronica
Yeah.
company started. And basically everything in Eindhoven has something to do with this company. It's either people that work there, whole sort of districts of housing was built for workers. A lot of the buildings in the city are all owned by Philips or used to be. And, all that stuff is being redeveloped now. And you had laboratories and you had factories and,
But it's still going though.
Well, Philips moved almost everything, to other countries now because the production is all somewhere else. And then a couple of years ago, Philips moved from Eindhoven to Amsterdam. So the main board is now in Amsterdam, which was like an arrow in the heart of the city of Eindhoven. Because that's the city revolved around this company. So, but now, the buildings are still there. Everything's being redeveloped, so it's actually looking quite healthy now. But yeah, and I guess what I was trying to say is, Detroit has the same thing with sort of the auto companies, but Detroit is in a far worse state than any other city in the world, I think. But,
a sense of being abandoned and betrayed.
Yeah, and the thing is that if you have so much sort of technology around you, that just sort of influences you. And I think a lot of the music that was made in Detroit was influenced by the sort of exodus of people, because there was no work anymore and, there was more poverty, and together with these sort of big sort of buildings and, typical architecture for factories and things like that. So, it just sort of sets the scene for, post-apocalyptic, futuristic, blah, 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 and I think Eindhoven has like similarities, but it's not nearly as bad. But way back, people like Carl Craig had some dealings with some labels in Eindhoven, and you have a label called Jax, who used to put out lots of Detroit and Chicago stuff, and so there was definitely sort of a conversation going on between the two cities,
Because that weighs very heavily in your music. Yeah, the Detroit strings, that sort of emotiveness, the idea of like this kind of interesting, I guess, juxtaposition between, kind of like a cold mechanism and this very sort of warm musicality.
Yeah, it's like machine soul, where I don't know where that comes from. I think if you're sort of influenced by your earliest clubbing experiences as well, and that was the music that I was listening to, like old Derek May and Stacey Pullen and Kenny Larkin and Carl Craig, and that was sort of my vibe. And they all had that sort of fierceness and toughness in the beats and the bass, and then sort of quite melancholic sort of melody. It was never really happy or never really super sad either, but there was always sort of like a thing in between. I don't know. It's hard to describe. I think, melancholy is maybe the best word for it,
Yeah, there's very, there's, I couldn't describe your music as sort of like, tracks as being like a major chord track or a minor chord track. There's always that frisson between the two.
Yeah, that's also because I think in the beginning especially I had no idea what a major and a minor chord was, but it's just you just make sort of what you hear in your head, and that was what I heard. There's like sort of contrasting melodies or that sort of stuff. And I think that's also what I found in drum and bass, in the early drum and bass, like people like Dillinger or Goldie or Doc Scott or Votek, who would have this sort of fierceness in their beats and their bass lines, and at the same time use these sort of beautiful pads on the top and make it sort of very futuristic and interesting. It was like a palette, it was a very widespread sort of sound palette, I guess.
Because then it split drum and bass, really, didn't it, into the kind of LTJ Bookham intelligent drum bass, and then into something kind of far harder and darker on the other side.
Yeah.
And was that a point for you where it all kind of?
No, but a good segue, because what happened was those sort of there was like a sort of a split. I wouldn't even say the LTJ Bookham side of things, because he was sort of separate. He separated himself basically because he sort of put this sort of fingerprint on that style and just did that style, and no one else would do that.
True.
So, and he's actually still around doing that style. But there was definitely a split between a sort of more musical version of drum and bass and a more fiercer, harder one. The harder one was like represented by At Russian Optical, I think, in the beginning, and Matrix and early Bad Company. And then the more musical styles like Hospital, those sort of, became even a bit fluffy in a way. And the thing was that both styles had interesting records. I loved the early Bad Company stuff, and I was a big At Russian Optical fan. At the same time, I also liked, more musical approach like Caliber or people like that. But it was very difficult to play both those sounds in one set. And that's where I thought I should make music myself, because I just needed a sort of bridge, between these two styles, so that if I was DJing at my club, I would be able to play some harder stuff and some more melodic stuff. So and it was very difficult to find music to sort of bridge that gap. And you have Marcus Intellects, and then D-Bridge started to do some solo stuff, and so that was some of the music I would play. But then there's just not enough.
Now, your relationship with D-Bridge, he sung on your first album.
Yeah.
And to great effect, I think it was his debut as a vocalist, wasn't it, as well? So at what point did you connect with him, as from a fan of what he was doing to actually working with him?
Well, we ran the club. So every month we would have, UK people over, and, some people would return to the club, sort of back by popular demand. And, Darren was one of them, and Marcus Intellects, DJ Flight, Goldie played lots of times, Doc Scott, So we had this sort of, it was funny because that was the people I looked up to so much when I went to Metalheads, and now they were all playing at my club, But, Darren was one of them, and, when I started making music myself, it was sort of... for me, it was a little bit easier, I think, to be heard, because people knew me as Martyn from Eindhoven that runs that real good club. So, once I started doing something that was sort of, not too cringeworthy, I was able to just send it to Marcus and to Darren and to Flight, and they would listen because they knew me personally, So I think I had a little step ahead of most people that send demos. And obviously, also back then, not that many people made music. Now there's way more people.
So when they first started hearing you doing things that are obviously outside the drum and bass genre,
that was later though. That was later.
That was obviously later.
Because in the beginning it was straight up drum and bass, and they kind of knew what I was doing at the club or trying to do sound wise, trying to sort of bridge that gap between hard and melodic, and they could hear that in the music as well. And as soon as there was a couple of good tracks. It was really only, after a year of making music seriously, when the music was already picked up and released. So I did a release on Marcus Intellects' label, and then I did one on DJ Flight's, and that's sort of where, for me, the recording career.
Do you have any of that
no.
here? With you? I knew you were going to say that.
No, but I mean, it's not bad. I mean, it's really I can still listen to it, but I didn't, I never play it, so I haven't got it on the laptop. So
right, no, fair enough. Yeah.
It's not horrible.
No, I'm sure it's not. I mean, it's great that you can live with it now. I mean, it's one of the hardest things being an artist, I think, is living on record, isn't it?
I think the other thing that was sort of that sort of pushed me over the brink, I would say, is my dad passed away in 2004, the end of 2004, and it was weird because I was making music a little bit and sort of trying stuff, and it sounded all right. It wasn't superb, but it was also not very bad. So I could just sort of play the tracks in the DJ sets and blah blah blah. But then I don't know, when he passed away, something sort of changed. I mean, I don't know if you had any sort of close relatives pass away. But
my dad died as well.
And it just sort of mentally it changes you, and I actually didn't really sort of mourn for a long time, but I went straight to work. I was, for some reason, I thought, life is very short, life is very relative in a way, so you just have to make it happen now. There's no real waiting anymore. And I think before that, maybe my life was a bit more freestylish, a bit more like, oh yeah, cool. let's try a bit of this, try a bit of that, and then move on. Maybe go to school, maybe not. That sort of thing. And I think there was all of a sudden, I had a goal, and also obviously with the sort of emotional content, weighing on you so heavily. Everything you make will definitely sort of be
emotionally
have that
resonant.
signature. Yeah. And I think the first 2 tracks that I made straight after my dad's passing were the ones that were signed. And then I was like, okay, this is the sort of street I went into, and now I'm going to follow this path, And for some reason, you can sort of learn how to tap into that emotion that you had and use it, And I think that's what I still do, Now I sort of I'm not really afraid to look at sort of personal matters and sadnesses or happiness or whatever, and do something with this emotion, instead of just sort of putting it away and saying like, well, my artist persona is one guy and my personal persona is another guy. You know what I mean? I sort of fused it together, and I think in most of my music you can probably hear that there is some sort of realness to it. There's something that was actually in my heart that came out through the music.
Should we have a listen
to one of my stuff?
Yeah, let's do that.
One of my stuff.
This tape was supposed to be about love. I guess the distortions of love. A lot of sex, and a lot of pleasure, and a lot of nothing.
You can hear on this new album, Ghost People, like a lot more of your sort of house and kind of 4/4 influences coming through.
Yeah, I mean, I did 2 albums. The first one was much more sort of breaky, I think. It came out in 2009, and I was quite inspired sort of by stuff like Burial and Digital Mystics and Code 9 and sort of early dubstep, I guess. And also garage like LB and things like that. So I guess that was in there a little bit more, but for me, it's not really about the what kind of style the music is in. It's much more sort of a vibe, and to me, this sounds exactly the same as the first album, or even the drum and bass that I did in the beginning. It's sort of I don't know, Martyn music.
Has the fact that you moved to Washington DC, the fact that you're kind of outside the politics and the kind of scene nonsense, does that help you
Yeah.
maintain your own thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I was always outside. Even in Holland, you're not in the epicenter of drum and bass or the epicenter of dubstep or whatever. So for me, I always felt more comfortable just sort of going into a city, like London or Berlin, and just sort of sucking up all the inspiration, all the new things, and then just go home where there's nothing around and just doing something with it. I think actually if I would live in London, maybe not now, but if I would have lived in London a couple of years ago, I would be too influenced by other things, and I would probably, have a sort of quite similar sound or similar ideas to what other people are doing, just because, you go out a lot and you hear what other people are doing. And I mean, you can hear that now, and there's a lot of sort of London-based producers that have a similar sort of aesthetic, and it's quite nice for me to, proverbially speaking, live somewhere in the desert and then, just cook up something new, and then 6 months later come back and it's fresh,
Because it seems to me that the idea of bass music, which is very, very wide, if it is actually a genre, if you could call it a genre, it seems a lot of the guys that originally, some of your peers that originally were kind of under that dubstep umbrella, are now much closer to house and techno really than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just how music sort of changes, and how it develops, and a lot of the early, more experimental dubstep things were picked up by techno DJs as well. Like Ricardo Villalobos played some dubstep, and he played like Shackleton and things like that.
Right.
And like the Hardwax crew, T++ and Ben Glock and Deadman and all them. They were interested in this sort of sound, especially the somewhat darker things. And I think they've also pulled a lot of the dubstep people a little bit closer to them, And all of a sudden you have people like Mala DJing with Theo Parrish, and all of a sudden there is sort of a dialogue, I guess. And now it's sort of normal, now that is the new sound, is sort of bass heavy house or techno. Some stuff goes a little bit overboard even, but that's whatever you want to call it, UK bass.
What do you make of the Berlin end of things, the more minimal techno?
Some of it I really like. Some of it is a bit, too much for me. But I don't know. It's difficult to say, because I was so influenced by early Detroit and Chicago. And in some music you can hear that back. There's a lot of Germans that were also influenced, like Red Shape, for instance. They were all influenced by that same sound. So whatever they make now is very sort of close to my heart. Maybe even closer than dubstep, But yeah, like I said, it's I don't really look at genres in that way anyway. It's, for me, it's all just music, and there's just good music and bad music. I know it's a bit corny, but
No,
that's
it's true.
really how I sort of judge it.
Yeah, and in your DJ sets, you have the opportunity to play across the board. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, especially over the last year and a half, I also started playing live, and this really helped me actually, because before I would just, if I would be invited to DJ somewhere, I would just play my own stuff, and a lot of people were always sort of disappointed by my sets because there's none of my music in there. And, because I don't really like the track we just listened to. I haven't heard that in months, because I don't really like listening to my own music, and I always forget to play it as well. Because for me, I just finish it in the studio and it's done. And then I just leave it behind and do something else, And so I would play these DJ sets, and people were like, "Where's all your new stuff? Where's your new music?" And then usually, like all the way in the end, the last two tunes, I would play my own things, just because I was like, "Oh yeah, crap! I have to still, I have to play this and I have to play this." So, but usually my DJ sets would just be music that inspires me, or music that I love, or old stuff that I think people should listen to or hear, And
are they open-minded, your crowds? I mean, are they?
Yeah. I mean, it's not that they hated my music. It's just that they always, at the end, always said like, "Yeah, great set, but you could have played at least one of your own tunes, And the thing was that I started playing live because I just thought it would be better to sort of separate it. I think I was watching on YouTube. I was watching a little video of Thomas Bangalter, the guy from Daft Punk.
Sure.
And he did a DJ set at like an Ed Banger night or something like that. And it was like a little clip, one of those live on camera phone things, And he was playing like some old disco. And I was like, yeah, if you go see Thomas Bangalter DJ, you want to hear him play all this old stuff that inspired him, cool new things by friends of his or whatever. Do you want him to play Daft Punk? No. Because, if you want to hear Daft Punk, you just go see one of their live shows, And I was like, that's what I want. If I separate the two, live, with just my own music and DJing with just my sort of influences and everything I love, it's more clear, And that's what I did. So I started sort of, experimenting with live and figuring out how I can sort of split my tunes up a little bit. And
much more to go wrong.
Yeah, it was quite daunting in the beginning because I never thought about live, and I actually always said to friends of mine, like, oh, I never play live because it sucks, and I've never seen a good live set, blah, blah, blah. I'm never going to do it. And then, all of a sudden, it sort of clicked that maybe that was the solution to my sort of problem, So, when I did this new album, I had in the back of my mind that I was going to try and make sort of a live set out of it and include some old tracks and just sort of see where it ends up.
So if I were to go and see a live set of yours, what could I expect in terms of what would I be seeing?
The live set is basically all my stuff. It's lots of sort of re-edits of my own tunes, stuff mixed. I sort of now I have a pretty good sort of template and how I can play live. It's quite intuitive, so I can on the fly I can mix beats from one track with melodies from the other one and add some stuff myself. And I have some effects and some outboard stuff. So there's quite a lot going on, and it's very active. It's hard work. So I only, usually my live sets are about an hour or an hour, 15 minutes, but it's pretty full on.
Right.
It's cool. It's just sort of very experimental. And, in the beginning, I was a bit more rigid and I was just sort of like, let's try and play the album as good as I can and then, get the hell out. But now I'm a bit more flexible and I've done it so much now. Basically all last year, I've been touring this live set. And it just freed me up as a DJ, Now I can just play good DJ gigs in smaller places and just go deep, play for a couple hours and, not have to worry too much about playing, Vancouver or all this sort of famous stuff. And now I just play like old house and techno and some new stuff or some indie rock or some post-punk or whatever I like, And
sounds luxurious.
Yeah, and I mean, people now sort of appreciate it because they know that if they want to see Martyn's music, then, they can just go to a live set. And it's also good for festivals because I think if people don't know your music and you go to a festival, you have like a 45-minute ridiculous slot, then, what's the point in sort of playing other people's music for 45 minutes? You should just sort of present yourself and your music so that people walk away and go like, okay, now we know what Martyn does and we like it and we check out what he does on iTunes or whatever, So it's a much better way and feels much better that way.
Now you have obviously a large UK and European fan base.
Yeah.
How does your music go down in the States?
It's been okay. I mean, a lot has happened in the last few years in the States, when it comes to electronic music. And, obviously a lot sort of ridiculousness has happened,
EDM.
Yeah, and sort of, dubstep has become this sort of rave phenomenon. And, you have places like Coachella where Usher is hanging out with God knows who. And, so there's a lot of sort of celeb that surrounds it, I guess. But I think it also brought a bit of appreciation for people that just like to lurk in clubs and listen to hour-long DJ sets. And that's a good thing, like the Detroit Festival, I think that's next week or something. And, places like Mutech in Canada and Red Bull's been doing some things. And, there's a lot of things going around that actually are quite constructive to electronic music. And, it's good to see that people like Ben Glock or Deadman get 6-hour slots in America. That was unheard of a few years ago, and now it's sort of appreciated. So I think there's, besides all the money and all the fame and blah, 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 there's also quite a few good things happening.
Because the music press here has been quite hysterical about
Yeah.
it. And they've,
What are they saying?
they've been saying things like, EDM is basically, they've taken the heart and soul of dance music, the gayness, the disco, the blackness, the New York history, and they've just ripped the heart, they've ripped it out and left this kind of white, blue collar, relatable framework, which is basically lacking all of the things that made it great in the first place.
Yeah, I mean,
Hysterical.
as soon as money is involved, there's always going to be people jumping on the bandwagon that want to make money and are there for the money, and so that sort of blurs whatever is happening. But I mean, there's lots of underground stuff happening in, like in New York or in Chicago. There's warehouse parties. There is, man, it's great. And so much talent as well. There's so many good DJs still in the States and who do very interesting things. And then, I haven't even mentioned the whole LA connection with Brainfeeder and the sort of instrumental hip hop thing. And there's,
Of course,
there's a lot. There's a lot of things.
This is interesting. This is very interesting. I mean, you released your Ghost People album on Brainfeeder.
Yeah.
And Brainfeeder is Flying Lotus's record label.
Yeah.
How did that connection come about?
It's not as far-fetched as it sounds, I think, because what happened was he was Flylo was quite interested in sort of what a lot of UK people were doing, like Code 9 and Hudson Mohawk and Rusty and people like that. And for some reason, I got onto his radar as well. So he included a few of my tracks in his live set. So, and we started talking, and he invited me and Code to play at one of his Brainfeeder events. And the Brainfeeder events basically are sort of 6 or 7 artists on the lineup. Everyone gets 45 minutes and just do whatever you want, And their little crew, I guess, is rooted in hip hop, but basically they're all sort of doing something different with it, Like you have people like Ross G, who is sort of only interested in sub bass. And then you have Gas Lamp Killer, who's more like a rave DJ, sort of weird hip hop DJ, but very eclectic.
Sure.
No Such Thing, who's more like sort of quite IDM, I guess. And then Flylo himself is, very, very widespread in his sound and in his color. And so there was already a wide sort of palette of music. And then he added me and Code to it, and we would play like some dubstep, some techno, some UK funky or whatever we want, and Code played some grime or stuff like that. So we would play on their events usually as the last DJs to sort of get all the people dancing in the end. And so that was our first connection with Brainfeeder, and then I did my first album, and he supported it quite a lot. And then when I was thinking about my second one, he was. I just mentioned it sort of in passing, and he was like, well, if you don't want to do it on your own label, because it was a lot of hard work putting out the album, he said, then, I'd be honored to do it on mine. So I was like, okay. So we thought about it for a little bit and made a plan. And
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So what are
great.
you're talking of your own label.
Yeah.
What's the drive behind that? I mean, having an independent label in this day and age is hard work.
Yeah. I mean,
why do you do it?
Well, basically because I was tired of waiting. Because when you're a producer, especially a beginning one, you can make lots of music, but at the end of the day, it has to get signed somewhere, and then someone's putting it out. And usually, when someone runs a record label but is not putting out his own music, there's not that much rush to do it. So basically, I was waiting for releasing my own tunes on different labels, and I got so sick of it, and I was like, I want to do this myself, because at least then you have sort of full control over your own music, your own artwork, your distribution. You have everything under control. And a friend of mine, Erosi, is a good friend of mine that I've known since I was 13, I think. and we worked together on the club night, where he would do flyers and decoration and stuff. And I was talking to him about my sort of frustration with this waiting period, and he was like, "Well, we can do it ourselves. I'll just do all the art, you do all the music. We're done." So we just sort of tried to get that together, and we started a label, and we called it 3024 because that was the zip code where we lived at that time. And so it originally started as just a sort of outlet for my own music.
Sure.
And I wrote my first album, and I was like, I don't even want to shop it around to other labels. I'll just do it myself. It's nice, like indie.
Now you're not just putting out your own music anymore.
No,
you actually have
what changed,
something here.
Yeah, what changed was that I think after my first album, I got lots of offers for other things, and nice little side projects and remixes, and for some reason the focus of the label shifted much more to other people, and I was like, now people know who Martyn is and they know my label, so why not use that to sort of push other people, that may need a little push or a little bit more attention than they would usually get, and if someone can say, well, I released a record on Martyn's label, maybe that helps, and it does for some people, And I just heard a lot of music out when I was, if I would be DJing, I'd hear the guy before me play something or after me, and I was like, wow, this is cool. Why is this not on a record? And so I started signing bits and pieces from other people that I liked, or friends of mine, or just people that came up with an interesting concept, and they were like, I want to do techno 12-inch on your label. And I was like, well, bring it, I want to see that. And so that's kind of how it started. And now it's sort of a collection of, just people from across different scenes and countries. And, it goes from Julio Bashmore to Red Shape to Jacques Green to Zombie to Ben Clock to, so there's a lot of people involved. And I just like the fact that if you look at sort of all the releases on Discogs or whatever, no other label would have a collection of people like that, that are so sort of varied. I mean, that you have a Julio Bashmore record, and then 2 months later you can do like a hard techno thing.
So it's very much curated by your taste.
It's just, that's all it is. It's just me on the A&R, and then Erosi does all the artwork, and even in the artwork there's a sort of a line, a sort of development, I guess. So, for all the people that want to collect all the sleeves, because we spend a lot of time and money on, providing a real nice product, because, I mean, people don't have that much money nowadays to spend on music. And I think, if you spend music on a 12-inch, then, or money on a 12-inch, then there should be 2 or 3 really good tunes and real nice sleeves, so that, you actually have something physical that's beautiful, And sometimes we do 2 tracks on the vinyl, and then you get like a free download and get an extra track. Something like, there always has to be something special, just to sort of keep people sweet and, give something to people.
Added value.
Yeah, I mean, running a record label like this, it will never make you any money anyway, or very little, So you might as well just make the best out of it and just make something really beautiful, and then and tour the world, and that's it. So I mean, I think as far as sort of a record label, there's no gain really. The only gain is bringing music out into the world.
It's a great way to contribute outside your own.
You have to give back. Giving is much better than taking, in my opinion. So it's nice to. I mean, of course, people still have to pay. I can't do it completely for free, but it's nice to to just give people a chance to release music. And there's like a good example is the Julio Bashmore 12-inch we did. He did 2 tracks, and we were sort of ready to master everything and put everything out. And then at the last minute, he came up with this 3rd one, and he sent to me, and he was like, it would be amazing if you would add this to the package, And it was a track called Grand National, and it was completely stupid. It was based on horses, on the horse race. And it was like a sort of a slow disco track with horse sounds in it. And it was ridiculous. It had lots of humor. And, the first time I heard it, I was like, what is this? I had no idea what he wanted to do. But I thought, if this is his wish, to sort of, complete the package with something that has a little bit of humor. And I bet no other label would ever take this serious. So that would be a reason for me to, to say, okay, let's do this, and just see what happens. And it actually, I think it worked in his favor a little bit, because he just sort of broadened his little sound a little bit. And, lots of people refer to that track. I think the Grand National was a few weeks ago, and I saw on Twitter all these people listening to that track again, sort of warming up to the race.
I think underground music can be a little bit po-faced.
Oh yeah. So, but it was just fun to do, and I mean, I didn't even believe all that strongly in that track, to be honest. He knows that, by the way, so that's fine. But I was like, I'm not going to be the one to sort of deny it. And if this is his concept, is these 3 tunes together and including this one, then we should do it. And I think after that one, many more sort of producers came up to me and they were like, I have an idea. Not like, oh, I have a track, do you want to sign it? But I have an idea for a 12-inch or for an EP. And that's actually much more interesting when people sort of come up to you and say like, well, I have an idea. I want to do 4 tracks. It's going to be sort of like this, but not really. And it's going to be original. Do you want it? And then I'll, who am I to deny that?
What have we got here from your label?
Well, I actually have a really new thing. It's by a guy called Jacques Green. He's from Montreal. And I guess this is a good sort of example of how it works. He's quite known for a sort of, I don't know how to describe it. It's quite bass music-y, He does a lot of things with sort of R&B vocals, and he sent me one track that he released in a sort of an acid workout, like an acid 303 thing, house thing. And it was quite straight and not really as UK influenced as most of his other things. And I think it ended up on a B-side somewhere, a track called Clark. And I was like, if you want to do a concept, like this for a complete 12 and just, take it a little bit darker and, bring out your 808 and sort of, make a bit more like a house track, then, I'd be really happy to put it out, And it really didn't take him all that long to come up with 3 brand new tracks for the release. And I think they're all really strong, but there's this one which is going to be on like a digital, on the digital release of it, called Daku. And we should listen to it.
Great. When is this out?
In about 6 weeks, I think. Yeah. There's another one that came out today by John Convex. One guy that used to be an instrumental. He did a track with Bridge with him singing on it as well. So that one came out today, and then this is the next one.
So what's the release schedule like? Sounds pretty full on.
This year it's been picking up a little bit. I mean, basically there's no release schedule because if there's no good tracks around, then I don't put out anything. You know, I don't have to sort of release everything every 2 months. So I think last year we did maybe 4 12 inches. The year before we did maybe only 2.
Right.
So and the year before that it was quite busy. But yeah, this year it's been picking up a lot, you know, and I've got like 4 or 5 lined up. So yeah, it's good.
What's next for you?
For me, I've done some remix work. I did a remix for a band called Chairlift from Brooklyn. I'm doing some other remix work for Motor City Drum Ensemble.
Right.
One for The Invisible. It's another nice band from London. And I'm working on an EP and a next LP for Brainfeeder. So there's still plenty.
And there's the relentless DJing.
Well, that's it. I mean, you know, I tour quite a lot, and I'm trying to sort of make it a little bit easier on myself, but I don't know. You know, every time I get an offer for something, it's just hard to say no. You know, there's always sort of nice places to travel to, or good lineups, or good clubs, or you know. So it's really difficult for me to sort of say like, you know, I should take off for 6 months or whatever and not do anything. But I mean, like last year, I worked so hard from sort of January to October. I was completely burned out. And so the last 2 months, I was really not able to do anything. And I think this year, it looks quite similar. It's going to be probably towards the end of this year, I'm going to be one of those people again that's sort of, you know, on the couch and just...
So how do you do it? I mean, you know, you look like quite a healthy dude to me.
Yeah.
Do you kind of avoid the trappings of the nightlife?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But I mean, I'm also I'm getting a little bit older too, you know. So just the recovery time becomes a little bit, you know, longer than usual. But yeah, I mean, you know, I've had some health problems in the you know, like the recent history as well. So I'm really sort of changing. I have changed my lifestyle quite a bit. So, you know, I don't drink any alcohol, I don't smoke, I don't do any drugs, you know. I do like yoga and, you know, that's sort of, I bike a lot. You know, it's quite, I don't know, it's sort of boring and healthy, but it's nice. I quite like it that way. And for some reason, I'm much more sort of clear-minded and, you know, I'm able to do a lot of things in a very short amount of time. And
are you a person of extremes in that sense, do you think?
Well, I mean, I do have a bit of a addictive personality, I think. So that's also why I like to stay away from certain things. You know, I just know that if I would go in, I would go in, you know. So it's much better to just not go there at all.
Sure.
But I mean, I quite like it, you know, and I just try to sort of maximize my time here and, you know, do as much as I can music-wise, but also, you know, I like to read a lot, and I picked up a study recently, you know, do a master's, you know, just sort of do it part-time and read and study on the plane and things like that. So
most of us have like 365 days in our year.
Yeah. I wish I had more hours, you know. I would love to have more. I would give everything for like 5-6 more hours per day. That would be amazing, just to get everything done, you know.
Well, I think you're achieving quite enough for most of us with the 24 hours you've got.
Yeah.
Martyn, thank you so much for coming down to the All Saints Basement
Thank
Sessions.
you.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Cool. Thank you.